The bell above the diner's door jingled as Marcus Wheeler rolled his wheelchair inside. The air smelled of burnt coffee and fried eggs, and the hum of conversation dipped for a moment as heads turned. Marcus, a black veteran in his late 40s, wore a faded army jacket, its sleeves frayed from years of use. His legs lost to an IED in Afghanistan were a silent testament to his sacrifice. But the stares he got weren't of gratitude. They were sharp, suspicious, like he'd wandered into a place he didn't belong. In this small southern town where Confederate flags still hung in some yards, Marcus was used to it, but today the weight of those eyes felt heavier. The diner was a snapshot of the community: white families at booths, a few truckers at the counter, and a jukebox playing Johnny Cash in the corner. Marcus maneuvered his chair toward an empty table near the window, his hands steady but his jaw tight. He'd come here before, always hoping for a quiet meal, but the whispers followed him like shadows. "Trouble," someone muttered from a nearby booth. A woman clutched her purse tighter. Marcus ignored them, focusing on the menu, but the tension in the room was a living thing, coiling tighter with every second. He was halfway through ordering a coffee when the diner's owner, a wiry man named Hank with a permanent scowl, leaned over the counter. "You paying up front today?" Wheeler Hank's voice was loud, deliberate, cutting through the chatter. Marcus froze. He'd never been asked to pay before eating. Not here, not anywhere. The implication hung in the air. "You're not trusted." A few customers snickered, and a man in a plaid shirt at the counter muttered, "About time someone said it." Marcus met Hank's gaze, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Same as always, I pay when I'm done." His words were measured, but inside anger simmered. He'd served his country, bled for it, and now he couldn't even get a cup of coffee without being treated like a thief. The room seemed to close, and the stares growing bolder, the whispers louder. Marcus felt the familiar sting of being the outsider, the one who had to prove he belonged. Hank didn't back down. "Things change," he said, crossing his arms. "Folks been complaining, saying stuff's gone missing when you're around." The lie was blatant, but it landed like a match in dry grass. The man in plaid nodded vigorously, and a woman at a booth chimed in. "I heard that too." The accusations piled on each one, flimsier than the last, but they didn't need to be true. They just needed to be loud. Marcus gripped the arms of his wheelchair, his knuckles whitening. He could feel the room turning against him, the tide of prejudice pulling him under. "You got proof?" Marcus asked, his voice low but steady. Hank smirked, shrugging. "Don't need proof when everyone knows." The crowd murmured in agreement, their voices a chorus of confirmation bias. A teenage boy at a nearby table laughed, mimicking Hank's shrug. Marcus's chest tightened. He'd faced insurgents and explosions, but this casual collective cruelty was a different kind of battlefield. He was one man against a mob, and they knew it. The tension snapped taut when Hank pointed at the door. "Maybe you ought to eat somewhere else. Wheeler, save us all the trouble." The words were a gut punch, but Marcus didn't flinch. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on Hank's. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. The room went quiet, the air crackling with defiance. For a moment it seemed like Marcus might hold his ground, but then the man in plaid stood up his chair, scraping loudly. "You heard him?" he growled. "Get out!" The crowd's hostility was palpable now, a wall of glares and muttered threats. Marcus felt the weight of it, the suffocating sense that no one would stand with him. He'd been here before, in different diners, different towns, always the same script. "You don't belong." He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the bell above the door jingled again. A man stepped inside his presence, commanding the room like a storm rolling in. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped gray hair and a Marine colonel's uniform that gleamed with authority. His name tag read Elliot, and his eyes, sharp as a blade, scanned the diner before settling on Marcus. The chatter died instantly. Even Hank straightened his scowl, faltering. Colonel Elliot didn't speak at first. He walked slowly, his boots clicking on the checkered floor, until he stood beside Marcus's table. The crowd watched, uncertain, as he pulled out a chair and sat down facing Marcus like they were old friends. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his voice calm, but carrying an undercurrent of steel. Marcus blinked, caught off guard. Sure," he said, glancing at the crowd who were now whispering among themselves. Hank cleared his throat. stepping forward. Colonel, this ain't your business. I decide what's my business. Elliot cut him off, not even looking at Hank. His gaze stayed on Marcus, warm but piercing, like he was seeing the man beneath the accusations. You served, didn't you? He asked. Marcus nodded, his throat tight. Army 2 tours. Elliot's eyes flicked to the wheelchair, then back to Marcus's face. Thank you, he said simply, the words heavy with respect. The room shifted, the crowd's confidence wavering. Hank's smirk faded, and the man in plaid sat back down, suddenly less sure of himself. But Hank wasn't done. Colonel, with all due respect, this man's been causing trouble. Stealing, disrupting, stealing. Elliot's voice was sharp now, cutting through Hank's words like a knife. He turned to face the owner, his posture rigid. You got evidence, or you just running your mouth? The question hung in the air, and Hank faltered, his eyes darting to the crowd for support. None came. Folks saw it, Hank stammered, pointing vaguely at the room. The woman who'd spoken earlier shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Elliot's gaze. The teenage boy looked down at his plate. Elliot stood, his height towering over the counter. Let's test that, he said, his voice low but commanding. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone, holding it up for all to see. I've got a buddy at the sheriff's office. I call him. We get security footage from that camera up there. He nodded at a dusty camera in the corner. Barely noticeable until now. We'll see who's been stealing. And if you're lying, Hank, you're going to answer for slander. The diner went silent, the weight of Elliot's words sinking in Hank's face, flushed red, his hands fidgeting. The crowd, so quick to condemn Marcus, now looked uneasy, their certainty crumbling. Marcus watched, his heart pounding, as the tide began to turn. You don't need to do that, Hank muttered, but Elliot wasn't listening. He turned to the crowd, his voice rising. This man served his country, lost his legs for it. And you're sitting here accusing him of stealing coffee money. You ought to be ashamed. His words were a whip lashing at their consciences. The woman who'd clutched her purse looked down, her face pale. The man in plaid stared at his hands. Then Elliot dropped the bombshell. I've been coming to this diner for years, he said, and I've seen things go missing too. Funny thing is, it always happens when you're behind the counter. Hank, he pointed at the owner, whose jaw dropped. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Maybe we should check that footage after all. The room erupted in whispers, the crowd's allegiance shifting like sand. Hank stammered, his voice rising in panic. That's ridiculous. I've never saved it. Elliot snapped. He turned to Marcus, his expression softening. You don't deserve this. Not here, not anywhere. Then to the crowd, anyone else got a problem with this man eating his meal? No one spoke. The silence was deafening, a collective admission of guilt. Hank slumped against the counter, his authority shattered. The teenage boy who'd laughed earlier looked at Marcus with something like awe. The woman at the booth wiped her eyes, her purse forgotten. Marcus took a deep breath, his hands steady now. I just wanted a coffee, he said, his voice quiet but resonant. The simplicity of it hit hard, a reminder of how small the ask had been. How monstrous the response. Elliot nodded, sitting back down. Then let's get you one, he said, signaling the waitress, who hurried over, her hands trembling. The diner slowly came back to life. But it was different now. Conversations were hushed, glances softer. Hank retreated to the kitchen, his head low. The man in plaid left without a word, his chair scraping one last time. Marcus sipped his coffee, the bitterness of the moment fading with each swallow. Elliot stayed, eating a slice of pie, his presence a shield no one dared challenge. When Marcus finished, he reached for his wallet, but Elliot stopped him. On me, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Marcus nodded, a silent understanding passing between them. As he rolled toward the door, the bell jingling one last time, the crowd watched, not with suspicion, now but with something closer to respect. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Marcus paused, looking back at the diner. He'd come here expecting a fight, but he'd found an ally instead. The weight of the town's prejudice hadn't vanished, but it had cracked just a little, and that was enough for now. Inside, Elliot stood, his uniform a beacon in the dim light. He left a tip on the table, then turned to the crowd, his voice steady. Next time you see someone like him, you thank him. And if you can't do that, at least let him eat in peace. He walked out, leaving the diner to grapple with its conscience. The story spread as stories do in small towns. Some called it a reckoning, others a wake-up call. Hank's business took a hit as customers drifted to a diner across town, one that didn't make headlines for the wrong reasons. Marcus kept coming back, his wheelchair rolling over the same checkered floor. But the stares were fewer now, the whispers kinder. And somewhere in the quiet moments, people asked themselves, what would I have done? The question lingered, a challenge to do better, to see past the surface, to stand up when it counted. If you see someone being judged for who they are, not what they've done, don't look away. Say something. Change the story.